Hello there! We are continuing to read Equal Rights by Terry Pratchett, a Discworld novel. When we last checked off, Esk got on a caravan on her way to Ankh-Morpork after being separated by Granny Weatherwax. Subtitub. Granny Weatherwax was in trouble. First of all, she decided she should never have allowed Hilda to talk her into borrowing her broomstick. It was elderly, erratic, would fly only at night, and even then couldn't manage a speed of about a trot. Its lifting spells had worn so thin that it wouldn't even begin to operate until it was already moving at a fair lick. It was, in fact, the only broomstick ever to need bump starting. And it was while Granny Weatherwax, sweating and cursing, was running along a forest path holding the damn thing at shoulder height for the 10th time that she had found the bear trap. The second problem was that a bear had found it first. In fact, this hadn't been too much of a problem because Granny, already in a bad temper, hit it right between the eyes with the broomstick, and it was now sitting as far from her as it was possible to get in the pit, and trying to think happy thoughts. It was not a very comfortable night, and the morning wasn't much better for the party of hunters who, around dawn, peered over the edge of the pit. "About time, too," said Granny. "Get me out!" The startled heads withdrew, and Granny could hear a hasty, whispered conversation. They had seen the hat and broomstick. Finally, a bearded head reappeared, rather reluctantly, as if the body it was attached to was being pushed forward. It began. "Look, Mother." "I'm not a mother," said Granny. "I'm certainly not your mother. If you ever had mothers, which I doubt, if I was your mother, I'd have run away before you were born." "It's only a figure of speech," said the head reproachfully. "It's a damned insult is what it is." There was another whispered conversation. "If I don't get out," said Granny in ringing tones, "there will be trouble. Do you see my hat, eh? Do you see it?" The head reappeared. "That's the whole point, isn't it?" it said. "I mean, what will there be if we let you out? It seems less risky all around if we just sort of fill the pit in. Nothing personal, you understand." Granny realized what it was that was bothering her about the head. "Are you kneeling down?" she said accusingly. "You're not, are you? You're dwarfs!" Whisper, whisper. "Well, what about it?" he asked the head defiantly. "Nothing wrong with that, is there? What have you got against dwarves?" Do you know how to repair broomsticks?" "Magic broomsticks?" "Yes," whisper, whisper. "What if we do?" "Well, we could come to some arrangement, ... The dwarf halls rang to the sound of hammers, although mainly for effect. Dwarves found it hard to think without the sound of hammers, which they found soothing. So well-off dwarves in the clerical profession paid goblins to hit small ceremonial anvils just to maintain the correct dwarvish image. The broomstick lay between two trestles. Granny Weatherwax sat on a oak outcrop, while a dwarf, half her height, wearing an apron that was a mass of pockets, walked around the broom and occasionally poked it. Eventually he kicked the bristles and gave a long intake of breath, a sort of reverse whistle, which is the secret sign of craftsmen across the universe, and means that something expensive is about to happen. "Well," he said, "I could get the apprentices in to look at this, I could. It's an education in itself. And you say it actually managed to get airborne?" "It flew like a bird," said Granny. The dwarf lit a pipe. "I should very much like to see that bird," he said reflectively. "I should imagine it's quite something to watch a bird like that." "Yes, but can you repair it?" said Granny. "I'm in a hurry." The dwarf sat down slowly and deliberately. "As for repair," he said. "Well, I don't know about repair. Rebuild, maybe. Of course, it's hard to get the bristles these days, even if you can find people to do the proper binding, and the spells need—" "I don't want it rebuilt. I just want it to work properly," said Granny. "It's an early model, you see," the dwarf plugged down. Very tricky, those early models. You can't get the wood. He was picked up but utterly until his eyes were level with Granny's. Dwarves, being magical in themselves, as it were, are quite resistant to magic, but her expression looked as though she was trying to weld his eyeballs to the back of his skull. "Just repair it," she hissed. "Please." "What, make a bad job?" said the dwarf, his pipe clattering to the floor. "Yes." "Patch it up, you mean? Betray my training, ain't it? Betray my training by doing half a job?" "Yes," said Granny. Her pupils were two little black holes. "Oh," said the dwarf. "Right then." Gander, the trail boss, was a worried man. They were 3 mornings out from Zempus, making good time, and were climbing now toward the rocky pass through the mountains known as the Paps of Scylla. There were 8 of them. Gander often wondered who Scylla had been, and whether he would have liked her. A party of gnolls had crept up on them during the night. The nasty creatures, a variety of stone goblin, had slit the throat of a guard and must have been poised to slaughter the entire party. Only no one knew quite what happened next. The screams had woken them up, and by the time people had puffed up the fires and Treatle the wizard had cast a blue radiance over the campsite, the surviving gnolls were distant, spidery shadows, running as if all the legions of hell were after them. Judging by what had happened to their colleagues, they were probably right. Bits of gnolls hung from the nearby rocks, giving them a sort of jolly, festive air. Gander wasn't particularly sorry about that. Gnolls like to capture travelers and practice hospitality of the red-hot knife and bludgeon kind. But he was nervous of being in the same area as something that went through a dozen wiry and wickedly armed gnolls like a spoon through a lightly boiled egg, but left no tracks. In fact, the ground was swept clean. It had been a very long night, and the morning didn't seem to be an improvement. The only person more than half awake was Esk, who had slept through the whole thing under one of the agons and had complained only of odd drums. Still, it was a relief to get away from the macabre sight. Gander considered that gnolls didn't look any better inside than out. He hated their guts. Esk sat on Treatle's wagon, talking to Simon, who was steering inexpertly, while the wizard caught up with some sleep behind them. Simon did everything inexpertly. He was really good at it. He was one of those tall lads, apparently made out of knees, thumbs, and elbows. Watching him walk was a strain. You kept waiting for the string to snap, and when he talked, the spasm of agony on his face, if he spouted an S or W looming ahead in the sentence, made people instinctively say them for him. He was worth it for the grateful look which spread across his acneed face like sunrise on the moon. At the moment, his eyes were streaming with hay fever. "Did you want to be a wizard when you were a little boy?" Simon shook his head.
"I just
"Wanted?"
to find out how things
"Worked?"
Yes. Then someone in my village told the university, and Master Treatle was sent to bring me. I shall be a
"Wizard?"
one day. Master Treatle says I have an exceptional grasp of theory."
Simon's damp eyes misted over an expression almost of bliss, drifted across his ravaged face.
"He tells me they've got thousands of books in the library at Unseen University,"
he said in the voice of a man in love.
"More books than anyone could read in a lifetime."
Okay, it was Esk talking to him. "I'm not sure I like books," said Esk conversationally. "How can paper know things? My granny says books are only good if the paper is thin."
"No, that's not right,"
said Simon urgently.
"Books are full of
He gulped air and gave her a pleading look. "Words?" said Esk after a moment's thought.
"Yes, and they can change things. That's
"What?"
I must find. I know if there's someone in all the old books. They
"Say?"
There's no new spells, but I know it's there somewhere, hiding the
"Words?"
Yes, that no
Wizard, said Esk, her face a frown of concentration.
Yes, has ever found."
His eyes closed, and he smiled a beatific smile, and added,
The words that will change the world.
What?
Eh?
Said Simon, opening his eyes in time to stop the oxen wandering off the track. You said all those W's. I did? I heard you. Try again. Simon took a deep breath.
The word, he said.
He continued. It's no good.
It's no good. It's gone, he said. It happens sometimes if I don't think about it. Master Treatle says I'm allergic to something.
Allergic to W's?
No.
Silly? Said S generally.
There's
something
in the air. Pollen, maybe, or grass dust. Master Treatle has tried to find the cause of it, but no magic seems to help it. They were passing through a narrow pass of orange rock. Simon looked at it disconsolately. My granny taught me some hay fever cures, Esk said. We could try those. Simon shook his head. It looked touch and go whether it would fall off. Tried everything, he said. Fine magician. I'd make a... can't even stutter the name.
I could see where that would be a problem, said Esk. She watched the scenery for a while, marshalling a train of thought. Is it possible for a woman to be, a wizard? She said eventually. Simon stared at her. She gave him a defiant look. His throat strained. He was trying to find a sentence that didn't start with a W. In the end, he was forced to make concessions.
A curious idea, he said.
He thought some more and started to laugh until Esk's expression warned him.
Rather funny, really,
he added, but the laughter in his face faded and was replaced by a puzzled look.
Never really thought about it before.
Well, can they? You could have shaved with Esk's voice.
Of course they can't. It's self-evident, child.
Simon. Oh, that's not Simon. Of course they can't. It's self-evident, child. Simon, return to your studies. Treatle pushed aside the curtain that led into the back of the wagon and climbed out onto the set board. The look of mild panic took up its familiar place on Simon's face. He gave Esk a pleading glance as Treatle took his reins from his hands, but she ignored him. Why not? What's so self-evident? Treatle turned and looked down at her. He hadn't really paid much attention before. She was simply just another figure around the campfires. He was the vice-chancellor of Unseen University, and quite used to seeing vague, scurrying figures getting on with essential but unimportant jobs like serving his meals and dusting his rooms. He was stupid, yes, in the particular way that very clever people can be stupid, and maybe he had all the tact of an avalanche and was self-centered as a tornado, but it would never have occurred to him that children were important enough to be unkind to. From long white hair to curly boots, Treatle was a wizard's wizard. He had the appropriate long bushy eyebrows, spangled robe, and patriarchal beard that was only slightly spoiled by the yellow nicotine stains. Wizards are celibate, but nevertheless enjoy a good cigar. It will all become clear to you when you grow up, he said. It's an amusing idea, of course. A nice play on words. A female wizard. You might as well invent a male witch. Warlocks, said Esk. Pardon me? My granny says men can't be witches, said Esk. She says if men tried to be witches, they'd be wizards. She sounds like a wise woman, said Treatle. She says women should stick to what they're good at, Esk went on. Very sensible of her. She says if women were as good as men, they'd be a lot better. Treatle laughed. She's a witch, said Esk, and added in her mind, There, what do you think of that, Mr. So-called clever wizard? My dear good young lady, am I supposed to be shocked? I happen to have a good respect for witches. Esk frowned. He wasn't supposed to say that. You have? Yes, indeed. I happen to believe that witchcraft is a fine career for a woman. A very noble calling. You do? I mean, it is? Oh, yes. Very useful in rural districts for people who are having babies and so forth. However, witches are not wizards. Witchcraft is nature's way of allowing women access to the magical fluxes, but you must remember it is not high magic. I see. Not high magic, said Esk grimly. Oh, no. Witchcraft is very suitable for helping people through life, of course, but I expect women aren't really sensible enough to be wizards, said Esks. I expect that's it, really. I'm nothing but the highest respect for women, said Treadle, who hadn't noticed the fresh edge to Esk's tone. They are without parallel when they're having babies and so forth. There it is, yes, the wizard conceded generously. But they can be a little unsettling at times, a little too excitable. High magic requires great clarity of thought, you see, and women's talents do not lie in that direction. Their brains tend to overheat. I am sorry to say there is only one door into wizardry, and that is the main gate at Unseen University, and no woman has ever passed through it. Tell me, said Esk, what good is high magic exactly? Treadle smiled at her. High magic, my child, he said, can give us everything we want. Oh, so put all this wizard nonsense out of your head, all right? Treadle gave her a benevolent smile. What is your name, child? Escarina. And why do you go to Ankh, my dear? I thought I might seek my fortune, muttered Esk. But I think perhaps girls don't have fortunes to seek. Are you sure wizards give people what they want? Of course, that's what high magic is for. I see. The whole caravan was traveling only a little faster than walking pace. Esk jumped down, pulled the staff from its temporary hiding place among the bags and pails on the side of the wagon, and ran back along the side of the carts and animals. Through her tears, she caught a glimpse of Simon, peering from the back of the wagon, an open book in his hands. He gave her a puzzled smile and started to say something, but she ran on and veered off the track. Scrubby windbushes scratched her legs as she scrambled up a clay bank, and then she was running free from a barren plateau, hemmed in by the orange cliffs. She didn't stop until she was good and lost, but the anger still buried brightly. She had been angry before, but never like this. Normally, anger was like the red flame you got when the forge was first lit, all glow and sparks, but this anger was different. It had the bellows behind it, and had narrowed to the tiny blue-white flame that cuts iron. It made her body tingle. She had to do something about it or burst. Why is it that when she heard Granny ramble on about witchcraft, she longed for the cutting magic of wizardry, but whenever she heard Treadle speak in his high-pitched voice, she would fight to the death for witchcraft? She'd be both, or none at all. And the more they intended to stop her, the more she wanted it. Yeah, Esk. She'd be a witch and a wizard, too, and she would show them. Esk sat down under a low-spreading juniper bush at the foot of a steep, sheer cliff, her mind seething with plans and anger. She could sense doors being slammed before she had barely begun to open them. Treadle was right. They wouldn't let her inside the university. Having a staff wasn't enough to be a wizard. There had to be training, too, and no one was going to train her. 20 minutes, man. 18, good. The midday sun beat down off the cliff, and the air around Esk began to smell of bees and gin. She lay back, looking at the near-purple dome of the sky through the leaves, and eventually she fell asleep. One side effect of using magic is that one tends to have realistic and disturbing dreams. There is a reason for this, but even thinking about it is enough to give a wizard nightmares. The fact is that the minds of wizards can give thoughts a shape. Witches normally work with what actually exists in the world, but a wizard can, if he's good enough, put flesh on his imagination. This wouldn't cause any trouble if it wasn't for the fact that the little circle of candlelight, loosely called the universe of time and space, is adrift in something much more unpleasant and unpredictable. Strange things circle and grunt outside the flimsy stockades of normality. There are weird hootings and howlings in the deep crevices at the edge of time. There are things so horrible that even the dark is afraid of them. Most people don't know this, and this is just as well because the world could not really operate if everyone stayed in bed with the blankets over their head, which is what would happen if people knew what horrors lay a shadow's width away. The problem is getting interested in magic and mysticism, spending a lot of time loitering on the very edge of the light, as it were, which gets them noticed by the creatures from the dungeon dimensions, who then try to use them in their indefatigable efforts to break into the particular reality. Most people can resist this, but the relentless probing by the things is never stronger than when the subject is asleep. Bel Shamharoth, Shalugan, the Insider, the hideous old dark gods of the Necrotelecomnicon, the book known to certain mad adepts by its true name of Liber Paginarum Vulvarum, are always ready to steal into a slumbering mind. The nightmares are often colorful and always unpleasant. Esk had got used to them ever since the first dream after her first borrowing, and familiarity had almost replaced terror. When she found herself sitting on a glittering, dusty plain under unexplained stars, she knew it was time for another one. "Drat," she said. "All right, come on then. Bring on the monsters. I just hope it isn't the one with the winkle on his face. One with his winkle on his face. Wait, winkle? Oh God." But this time it seemed that the nightmares had changed. Esk looked around and saw rearing up behind her a tall black castle. Its turrets disappeared among the stars. Lights and fireworks and interesting music cascaded from its upper battlements. The huge double doors stood invitingly open. There seemed to be quite an amusing party going on in there. She stood up, brushed the silver sand off her dress, and set off for the gates. She had almost reached them when they slammed. They didn't appear to move. It was simply that in one instant they were lounging ajar, and the next they were tight shut with a clang that shook the horizons. Esk reached out and touched them. They were black and so cold that ice was beginning to form on them. There was a movement behind her. She turned around and saw the staff, without its broomstick disguise. Standing upright in the sand, little worms of light crept around its polished wood, and crept around the carvings no one could ever quite identify. She picked it up and smashed it against the doors. There was a shower of octarine sparks, but the black metal was unscathed. Esk's eyes narrowed. She held the staff at arm's length and concentrated until a thin line of fire leapt from the wood and burst against the gate. The ice flashed into steam, but the darkness, she was sure now that it wasn't metal, absorbed the power without so much as glowing. She doubled the energy, letting the staff put all its stored magic into a beam that was now so bright that she had to shut her eyes, and could still see it as a brilliant line in her mind. Then it winked out. After a few seconds, Esk ran forward and touched the doors gingerly. The coldness nearly froze her fingers off. And from the battlements above, she could hear the sound of sniggering. Laughter wouldn't have been so bad, especially an impressive demonic laugh with lots of echo. But this was just sniggering. It went on for a long time. It was one of the most unpleasant sounds Esk had ever heard. She woke up, shivering. It was long after midnight, and the stars looked damp and chilly. The air was full of the busy silence of the night, which is created by hundreds of small furry things, treading very carefully in the hope of finding dinner while avoiding being the main course. A crescent moon was setting, and a thin gray glow toward the rim of the world suggested that, against all probability, another day was on the cards. Someone had wrapped Esk in a blanket. "I know you're awake," said the voice of Granny Weatherwax. "You could make yourself useful and light a fire. There's damn all wood in these parts." Esk sat up and clutched at the juniper bush. She felt light enough to float away. "Fire?" she muttered. "Yes, you know, pointing the finger and whoosh," said Granny, sourly. She was sitting on a rock, trying to find a position that didn't upset her arthritis. I don't think I can." "You tell me," said Granny cryptically. The old witch leaned forward and put her hand on Esk's forehead. It was like being caressed by a sock full of warm dice. "You're running a bit of a temperature," she added. "Too much hot sun and cold ground. That's foreign parts for you." Esk let herself slump forward until her head lay in Granny's lap, with its familiar smells of camphor, mixed herbs, and a trace of goat. Granny patted her in what she hoped was a soothing way. After a while, Esk said in a low voice, "They're not going to let me into the university. A wizard told me, and I dreamed about it, and it was one of those true dreams, you know? Like you told me, a Matty thing." "Metaphor," said Granny, calmly. "One of them." "Did you think it would be easy?" asked Granny. "Did you think you'd walk into their gates, waving your staff? Here I am. I want to be a wizard. Thank you very much. He told me there's no women allowed at the university. He is wrong. Now, no, I could tell he was telling the truth. You know, Granny, you can tell how... Foolish child. All you could tell was that he thought he was telling the truth. The world isn't always as people see it. I don't understand, said Esk. You'll learn, said Granny. Now tell me, this dream, they wouldn't let you into the university, right? Yes, they laughed. And then you tried to burn down the doors? Esk turned her head in Granny's lap and opened a suspicious eye. How did you know? Granny smiled, but a lizard would smile. Granny smiled, but as a lizard would smile. I was miles away, she said. I was bending my mind toward you, and suddenly, you seemed to be everywhere. You shone out like a beacon, so you did. As for the fire, look around. In the half-light of dawn, the plateau was a mess of baked clay. In front of Esk, the cliff was glassy, and must have flowed like tar under the onslaught. There were great gashes across it, which had dripped molten rock and slag. When Esk listened, she could hear the faint pink-pink of cooling rock. Oh, she said. Did I do that? So it would appear, said Granny. But I was asleep. I was only dreaming. It's the magic, said Granny. It's trying to find a way out. The witch magic and the wizard magic are. I don't know. The witch magic and the wizard magic are, I don't know, sort of feeding off each other, I think. Esk bit her lip. What can I do? She asked. I dream of all sorts of things. Well, for a start, we're going straight to the university, decided Granny. They must be used to apprentices not being able to control magic and having hot dreams. Else the place would have burned down years ago. She glanced toward the rim, and then down at the broomstick beside her. We will pass over the runnings up and down, the tightening of the broomstick's bindings, the muttered curses against dwarves, the brief moment of hope as the magic flickered fitfully, and the horrible black feelings as it died, the tightening of the bindings again, the running again, the sudden catching of the spell, the scrambling aboard, the yelling, the take-off. Esk clung to Granny with one hand and held her staff in the other, as they frankly pottered along a few hundred feet above the ground. A few birds flew alongside them, interested in this new flying tree. "Bugger off!" screamed Granny, taking off her hat and flapping it. "We're not going very fast, Granny," said Esk meekly. "We're going quite fast enough for me." Esk looked around. Behind them, the rim was a blaze of gold, barred with cloud. "I think we ought to go lower, Granny," she said urgently. "You said the broomstick..." Oh, hold on. "You said the broomstick won't fly in sunlight." She glanced down at the landscape below them. It looked sharp and inhospitable. It also looked expectant. "I know what I'm doing, miss," snapped Granny, gripping the broomstick hard and trying to make herself as light as possible. It has already been revealed that light on the Disk World travels slowly, the result of its passage through the Disk's vast and ancient magical field. So dawn isn't the sudden affair that it is on other worlds. The new day doesn't erupt. It sort of sloshes gently across the sleeping landscapes in the same way that the tide sneaks in across the beach, melting the sand castles of the night. It tends to flow around the mountains. If the trees are close together, it comes out of woods, cuts to ribbons, and sliced with shadows. An observer of some suitable high point, let's say for the sake of argument a wisp of cirrostratus on the edge of space, would remark on how lovingly the light spreads across the land, how it leaps forward on the plains and slows down when it encounters high ground, how beautifully it... Actually, there are some kinds of observers who, faced with all this beauty, will whine that you can't have heavy light and certainly wouldn't be able to see it even if you could. To which one can only reply, "So how come you're standing on a cloud?" So much for cynicism. But down on the disk itself, the broomstick barreled forward on the cusp of dawn, dropping every backward in the shadow of night. "Granny!" Day burst upon them. Ahead of the broomstick, the rocks seemed to flash into flames as the light washed over them. Granny felt the stick lurch and stared with horrifying fascination at the little scuttling shadow below them. It was getting closer. "What will happen when we hit the ground?" That depends if I can find some soft rocks, said Granny in a preoccupied voice. The broomstick's going to crash. Can't we do something? Well, I suppose we could get off. Granny, said Esk, in the exasperated and remarkably adult voice children use to berate their wayward Elwards, I don't think you quite understand. I don't want to hit the ground. It's never done anything to me. Granny was trying to think of a suitable spell, and regretting that headology didn't work on rocks, and had she detected the diamond edge to Esk's tone, perhaps she wouldn't have said, Tell the broomstick that, then! And they would indeed have crashed, but she remembered, in time, to grab her hat and brace herself. The broomstick gave a shudder, tilted, and the landscape blurred. It was really quite a short trip, but one that Granny knew she would always remember, generally around 3 o'clock in the morning after eating rich food. She'd remember the rainbow colors that hummed in the rushing air, the horrible, heavy feeling, the impression that something very big and heavy was sitting on the universe. She would remember Esk's laughter. She would remember, despite her best efforts, the way the ground sped below them, whole mountain ranges flashing past with nasty zipping noises. Most of all, she would remember catching up with the night. It appeared ahead of her, a ragged line of darkness, running ahead of the remorseless morning. She stared in horrified fascination as the line became a blot, a stain, a whole continent of blackness that raced towards them. For an instant, they were poised on the crest of the dawn as it broke in silent thunder on the land. No surfer ever rode such a wave, but the broomstick broke through the broil of light and shot smoothly through into the coolness beyond. Granny let herself breathe out. Darkness took some of the terror out of the flight. It also meant that if Esk lost interest, the broomstick ought to be able to fly under its own rather rusty magic. Granny said... It just says period. I'm just gonna... Period, Granny said, and cleared her bone-dry throat for a second try. Esk? This is fun, isn't it? I wonder how I make it happen. Yes, fun, said Granny weakly. But can I fly the stick, please? I don't want us to go over the edge, please. Is it true that there's a giant waterfall all around the edge of the world, and you can look down and see stars? Said Esk. Yes. Can we slow down now? I'd like to see it. No! No, not now! The broomstick slowed. The rainbow bubble around it vanished with an audible without a jolt, without so much as a shudder. Granny found herself flying at a respectable speed again. Granny had built a solid reputation on always knowing the answer to everything. Getting her to admit ignorance, even to herself, was an astonishing achievement. But the worm of curiosity was chewing at the apple of her mind. How, she said at last, did you do that? There was a thoughtful silence behind her. Then Esk said, I don't know. I just needed it, and it was in my head. Like when you remember something you've forgotten. Yes, but how? I don't know. I just had a picture of how I wanted things to be, and I sort of went into the picture. Granny stared into the night. She had never heard of magic like that, but it sounded awfully powerful and probably lethal. Went into the picture. Of course, all magic changed the world in some way. Wizards thought there was no other use for it. They didn't truck with the idea of leaving the world as it was and changing the people, but this sounded more literal. It needed thinking about. On the ground. For the first time in her life, Granny wondered whether there might be something important in all these books people were setting such store by these days, although she was opposed to books on strict moral grounds, since she had heard that many of them were written by dead people, and therefore it stood to reason reading them would be as bad as necromancy. Among the many things in the infinitely varied universe with which Granny did not hold was talking to dead people, who by all accounts had enough troubles of their own. But not, she was inclined to feel, as many as she had. She looked down bemusedly at the dark ground and wondered vaguely why the stars were below her. For a cardiac moment, she wondered if they had indeed flown over the edge, and then she realized that the thousands of little pinpoints below her were too yellow and flickered. Besides, who ever heard of stars arranged in such a neat pattern? It's very pretty, said Esk. Is it a city? Granny scanned the ground wildly. If it was a city, then it was too big, but now she had time to think about it. It certainly smelled like a lot of people. The air around them reeked of incense and grain and spices and beer, but mainly of the sort of smell that was caused by a high water table, thousands of people, and a robust approach to drainage. She mentally shook it off. The day was hard on their heels. She looked for an area where the torches were dim and widely spaced, reasoning that this would mean a poor district and poor people did not object to witches, and gently pointed the broom handle downward. She managed to get within 5 feet of the ground before dawn arrived for the second time. The gates were indeed big and black, and looked as if they were made out of solid darkness. Granny and Esk stood among the crowds that thronged the square outside the university and stared up at them. Finally, Esk said, "I can't see how people get in."
"Magic, I expect," said Granny sourly. "That's wizards for you. Anyone else would have bought a door knocker."
She waved her broomstick in the direction of the tall doors.
"You've got to say some hocus-pocus word to get in. I shouldn't wonder," she added.
They had been in Ankh-Morpork for 3 days, and Granny was beginning to enjoy herself, much to her surprise. She had found them lodgings in the Shades, an ancient part of the city whose inhabitants were largely nocturnal, and never inquired about one another's business, because curiosity not only killed the cat, but threw it in the river with weights tied to its feet. The lodgings were on the top floor, next to the well-guarded premises of a respectable dealer in stolen property, because, as Granny had heard, good fences make good neighbors. The Shades, in brief, were an abode of discredited gods and unlicensed thieves, ladies of the night, and peddlers in the exotic goods, alchemists of the mine, and strolling mummers, in short, all the grease on civilization's axle. And yet, despite the fact that these people tend to appreciate the soft magics, there was a remarkable shortage of witches. Within hours, the news of Granny's arrival had seeped through the quarter, and a stream of people crept, sidled, or strutted toward her door, seeking potions and charms and news of the future, and various personal and specialized services that witches traditionally provide for those whose lives are little clouded or full of stormy weather. She was at first annoyed, and then embarrassed, and then flattered. Her clients had money, which was useful, but they also paid in respect, and that was a rock-hard currency. In short, Granny was even wondering about the possibility of acquiring slightly larger premises with a bit of a garden and sending for her goats. The smell might be a problem, but the goats would just have to put up with it. They had visited the sites of Ankh-Morpork, its crowded docks, its many bridges, its souks, its kasbahs, its streets lined with nothing but temples. Granny had counted the temples with a thoughtful look in her eyes. Gods were always demanding that their followers acted other than according to their true natures. On the human fallout, this cause made plenty of work for witches. The terrors of civilization had so far failed to materialize, although a cut-purse had tried to make off with Granny's handbag. To the amazing of passers-by, Granny called them back, and back he came, fighting his feet, which had totally ceased to obey him. No one quite saw what happened to her eyes when she stared into his face, or heard the words she whispered in his cowering ear. But he gave her back all her money, plus quite a lot of money belonging to other people, and before she let him go, had promised to have a shave, stand up straight, and be a better person for the rest of his life. By nightfall, Granny's description was circulated to all the chapter houses of the Guild of Thieves, cut-purses, housebreakers, and allied trades, a very respectable body, which in fact represented the major law enforcement agency in the city. The reason for this is as follows. The guild was given an annual quota, which represented a socially acceptable level of thefts, muggings, and assassinations, and in return saw to it in very definite and final ways that unofficial crime was not only rapidly stomped out, but knifed, garroted, dismembered, and left around the city in an assortment of paper bags as well. This was held to be a cheap and enlightened arrangement, except by those malcontents who were really actually mugging and assassinated, and refused to see it as their social duty, and it enabled the city's thieves to plan a decent career structure, entrance examination, and codes of conduct similar to those adopted by the city's other professions, which, the gap not being very wide in any case, they rapidly came to resemble. Back to the story, with strict instructions to hold her at all costs. Thieves, being largely creatures of the night themselves, no trouble when it stares them in the face.
Granny had also written 2 more letters to the university. There had been no reply.
I like the forest best, said Esk.
I don't know,
Said Granny.
this is a bit like the forest, merely. Anyway, people certainly appreciate a witch here.
They're very friendly, Esk conceded. You know the house down the street where that fat lady lives with all those young ladies? You said were her relatives?
Mrs. Palm, said Granny cautiously. Very respectable lady.
People come to visit them all night long. I watched. I'm surprised they get any sleep.
Said Granny.
It must be a trial for the poor woman with all those daughters to feed, too. I think people could be more considerate.
Well, now, said Granny, I'm not sure that...
She was rescued by the arrival at the gates of the university of a large, brightly painted wagon. Its driver reined in the oxen a few feet from Granny and said,
"Excuse me, my good woman, but would you be so kind as to move, please?"
Granny stepped aside, affronted by this display of downright politeness, and particularly upset at being thought of as anyone's good woman, and the driver saw Esk. It was Treatle. Damn it! I had a voice for him. He grinned like a worried snake.
I say, it's the young lady who thinks women should be wizards, isn't it?
Yes, said Esk, ignoring a sharp kick on the ankle from Granny.
What fun! Come to join us, have you?
Yes, said Esk, and then, because something about Treatle's manner seemed to demand it, she added, Sir, only we can't get in.
We?
Said Treatle, and then glanced at Granny.
Oh, yes, of course. This would be your aunt?
My Granny. Only not really my Granny, just sort of everyone's Granny. Granny gave a stiff nod.
Well, we cannot have this, said Treatle, in a voice as hearty as a plump pudding. My word, no. Our first lady wizard left on the doorstep? That would be a disgrace. May I accompany you?
Granny grasped Esk firmly by the shoulder.
If it's all the same to you, she began,
but Esk twisted out of her grip and ran toward the cart. You can really take me in? She said, her eyes shining.
Of course, I am sure the heads of the orders will be most gratified to meet you. Most astonished and astounded, he said, and gave a little laugh.
Escarina Smith, said Granny, and then stopped. She looked at Treatle.
I don't know what is in your mind, Mr. Wizard, but I don't like it, she said.
Esk, you know where we live. Be a fool if you must, but you might at least be your own fool. She turned on her heel and strode off across the square.
What a remarkable woman, said Treatle vaguely. I see you still have your broomstick.
Capital! He let go of the reins for a moment and made a complicated sign in the air with both hands. The big doors swung back, revealing a wide courtyard surrounded by lawns. Behind them was a great rambling building, or buildings. It was hard to tell because it didn't look so much as if it had been designed as that a lot of buttresses, arches, towers, bridges, domes, cupolas, and so forth had huddled together for warmth. Is that it? Said Esk. It looks sort of melted.
Yes, that's it, said Treatle. Alma mater, gaudy armors, eagle tor, and so on. Of course, it's a lot bigger inside than out. Like an iceberg or so, I've given to understand. I've never seen the things. Unseen university, only of course a lot of it is unseen. Just go in the back and fetch Simon, will you?
Esk pushed inside the heavy curtains and peered into the back of the wagon. Simon was lying on a pile of rugs, reading a very large book and making notes on scraps of paper. He looked up and gave her a worried smile.
"Is that you?"
he said. Yes, said Esk with conviction.
"We thought you'd left us. Everyone thought you were riding with everyone else, and then when we stopped..."
I sort of caught up. I think Mr. Treatle wants you to come and look at the university.
"We're here?"
he said, and gave her an odd look.
"You're here?"
Yes.
"How?"
Mr. Treatle invited me in. He said everyone would be astounded to meet me. Uncertainty flashed a fin in the depths of her eyes. Was he right? Simon looked down at his book and dabbed at his running eyes with a red handkerchief.
"He has these little fancies," he muttered. "But he's not a bad person."
Bewildered, S looked down at the yellowed pages open in front of the boy. They were full of complicated red and black symbols, which in some inexplicable way were as potent and unpleasant as a ticking parcel, but which nevertheless drew the eyes in the same way that a really bad accident does. One felt that one would like to know their purpose, while at the same time suspecting that if you found out you would really prefer not to have done. Simon saw her expression, and hastily shut the book.
Just some magic, he mumbled. Something I'm...
Working, said Esk automatically.
Thank you. On.
It must be interesting reading books, said Esk.
Sort of. Can't you read, Esk?
The astonishment in her voice stung her. I expect so, she said defiantly. I've never tried. 45 minutes, okay. Esk wouldn't have known what a collective noun was if it had spat her in the eye. But she knew there was a herd of goats and a coven of witches. She didn't know what you called a lot of wizards. An order of wizards, a conspiracy, a circle. Whatever it was, it filled the university. Wizards strolled among the cloisters and sat on benches under the trees. Young wizards scuttled along pathways as bells rang, with their arms full of books, or in the case of senior students, with their books flapping through the air after them. The air had the greasy feel of magic and tasted of tin. Esk walked along between Treatle and Simon and drank it all in. It wasn't just there was a lot of magic in the air, but it was tamed and working like a mill race. It was power, but it was harnessed. Simon was as excited as she was, but it showed only because his eyes watered more and his stutter got worse. He kept stopping to point out the various colleges and research buildings. One was quite low and brooding, with high, narrow windows.
That's the library,
said Simon, his voice bursting with wonder and respect.
Can I have a little look?
Plenty of time for that later,
said Treatle. Simon gave the building a wistful look.
All the books of magic ever written,
he whispered. Why are the windows barred? Said Esk. Simon swallowed.
Because books of magic aren't like other books. They lead a...
That's enough, snapped Treatle. He looked down at Esk as if he had just noticed her, and frowned.
Why are you here?
You invited me in, said Esk.
Me? Oh, yes, of course. Sorry, mind wandering. The young lady who wants to be a wizard. Let us see, shall we?
He led the way up a broad flight of steps to an impressive pair of doors. At least they were designed to be impressive. The designer had invested deeply in heavy locks, curly hinges, brass studs, and an intricately carved archway to make it absolutely clear to anyone entering that they were not very important people at all. He was a wizard. He had forgotten the door knocker. Treatle rapped on the door with his staff. It hesitated for a while, and then slowly slid back its bolts and swung open. The hall was full of wizards and boys parents. There are two ways of getting into Unseen University. In fact, there are three, but at this time, wizards hadn't realized it. The first is to achieve some great work of magic, such as the recovery of an ancient and powerful relic, or the invention of a totally new spell. But in these times, it was seldom done. In the past, there had been great wizards capable of forming whole new spells from the chaotic raw magic of the world. Wizards, from whom, as it were, all the spells of wizardry had flowed, but those days had gone. There were no more sorcerers. So the more typical method was to be sponsored by a senior and respected wizard after a suitable period of apprenticeship. Competition was stiff for a university place, and the honor and privileges an unseen degree could bring. Many of the boys milling around the hall and launching minor spells at each other would fail and have to spend their lives as lowly magicians, mere magical technologists with defiant beards and leather patches on their elbows, who congregated in small, jealous groups at parties. Not for them the coveted pointy hat with optional astrological symbols, or the impressive robes, or the staff of authority. But at least they could look down on conjurers, who tended to be jolly and fat and inclined to drop their H's and drink beer and go around with sad, thin women in spangly outfits and e-tights and really infuriate magicians by not realizing how lowly they were and kept telling them jokes. Lowliest of all, apart from witches of course, were thaumaturgists, who never got any schooling at all. A thaumaturgist could just be trusted to wash out an alembic. I'm gonna read that again. A thaumaturgist could just be trusted to wash out an alembic. Many spells required things like mold from a corpse dead or crushing, or the semen of a living tiger, or the root of a plant that gave an ultrasonic scream when it uprooted. Semen from a living tiger, you just heard that sentence. Who was sent to get them? Right. It is a common error to refer to the lower magical ranks as hedge wizards. In fact, hedge wizardry is a very honored and specialized form of magic that attracts silent, thoughtful men of the druidic persuasion and topiaric inclinations. If you invited a hedge wizard to a party, he would spend half the evening talking to your potted plant, and he would spend the other half listening. Esk noticed that there were some women in the hall, because even young wizards had mothers and sisters. Whole families had turned up to bid the favored sons farewell. There was a considerable blowing of noses, wiping of tears, and the clink of coins as proud fathers tucked a little spending money into their offspring's hands. Very senior wizards were perambulating among the crowds, talking to the sponsoring wizards and examining the prospective students. Several of them pushed through the throng to meet Treadle, moving like gold-trimmed galleons under full sail. They bowed gravely to him and looked approvingly at Simon.
"This is Simon, is it?"
said the fattest of them, beaming at the boy.
"We've heard great reports of you, young man, eh? What?"
Simon bowed to the Arch-Chancellor Cutangle, Archmage of the Wizards of the Silver Star, said Treadle.
Simon bowed apprehensively. Cutangle looked at him benevolently.
"We've heard great things about you, my boy," he said. "All this mountain air must be good for your brain, eh?"
He laughed. The wizards around him laughed. Treadle laughed, which Esk thought was rather funny, because there wasn't anything particularly amusing happening.
"I don't know. From what we heard, it must be the only thing you don't know, lad,"
said Cutangle, his jowls waggling. There was another carefully timed bout of laughter. Cutangle patted Simon on the shoulder.
"This is a scholarship, boy," he said. "Quite astounding results. Never seen better. Self-taught, too. Astonishing. What? Isn't that so, Treacle?"
"Superb, Arch-Chancellor."
Cutangle looked around at the watching wizards.
"Perhaps you could give us a sample," he said. "A little demonstration, perhaps."
Simon looked at him in animal panic.
Actually, not very good." No,
said Cutangle, in what he probably really did think was an encouraging tone of voice.
"Do not be afraid. Take your time. When you are ready."
Simon licked his dry lips and gave Treadle a look of mute appeal.
He said, "You..."
He stopped and swallowed hard. His eyes bulged. The tears streamed from his eyes, and his shoulders heaved. Treadle patted him reassuringly on the back.
"Hay fever," he explained. "Don't seem to be able to cure it. Tried everything."
Simon swallowed and nodded. He waved Treadle away with his long white hands and closed his eyes. For a few seconds, nothing happened. He stood with his lips moving soundlessly, and then silence spread out from him like candlelight. Ripples of noiselessness washed across the crowds in the hall, striking the walls with all the force of a blown kiss, and then curling back in waves. People watched their companions, mouthing silently, and then went red with effort when their own laughter was as audible as a gnat's squeak. Tiny motes of light winked into existence around his head. They whirled and spiraled in a complex three-dimensional dance, and then formed a shape. In fact, it seemed to Esk that the shape had been there all the time, waiting for her eyes to see it, in the same way that a perfectly innocent cloud can suddenly become, without changing in any way, a whale or a ship or a face. The shape around Simon's head was the world. That was quite clear. Around the glitter and rush of the little lights blurred some of the detail. But there was great Atuin, the sky turtle, with the 4 elephants on its back, and on them the disk itself. There was the sparkle of the great waterfall around the edge of the world, and there at the very hub a tiny needle of rock that was the great mountain Cori Celesti, where the gods lived. The image expanded and homed in on the Circle C, and then on Ankh itself, the little lights flowing away from Simon and winking out of existence a few feet from his head. Now they slowed the city from the air, rushing towards the watchers. There was the university itself, growing larger. There was the great hall. There were the people, watching silent and open-mouthed, and Simon himself outlined in specks of silver light, and a tiny, sparkling image in the air around him. And that image contained an image and another and another. There was a feeling that the universe had been turning inside out in all dimensions at once. It was a bloated, swollen sensation. It sounded as though the whole world had seemed gloop. The walls faded, so did the floor. The paintings of former great mages, all scrolls and beards and slightly constipated frowns, vanished. The tiles underfoot, a rather nice black and white pattern, evaporated to be replaced by fine sand, grey as moonlight and cold as ice. Strange and unexpected stars glittered overhead. On the horizon were low hills, eroded not by wind or rain in this weatherless place, but by the soft sandpaper of time itself. No one else seemed to have noticed. No one else, in fact, seemed alive. Esk was surrounded by people as still and silent as statues, and they weren't alone. There were other things behind them, and more were appearing all the time. They had no shape. Or rather, they seemed to be taking their shapes at random from a variety of creatures. They gave the impression that they had heard about arms and legs and jaws and claws and organs, but didn't really know they all fitted together, or didn't care, or were so hungry they hadn't bothered to find out. They made a sound like a swarm of flies. They were the creatures out of her dreams, come to feed on magic. She knew they weren't interested in her now, except in the nature of an after-dinner mint. Their whole concentration was focused on Simon, who was totally unaware of their presence. S kicked him smartly on the ankle. The cold desert vanished. The real world rushed back. Simon opened his eyes, smiled faintly, and gently fell back into Esk's arms. A buzz went up from the wizards, and several of them started to clap. No one seemed to have noticed anything odd apart from the silver lights. Cut Angle shook himself and raised a hand to quell the crowd.
Quite astonishing, he said to Treacle. You say he worked it out all by himself?
Indeed, Lord.
No one helped him at all?
There was no one to help him, said Treacle. He was just wandering from village to village doing small spells. But only if people paid him in books or paper.
Cut Angle nodded.
It was no illusion, he said, yet he didn't use his hands. What was he saying to himself, do you know?
He says it's just words to make his mind work properly, said Treacle, and shrugged. I can't understand half of what he says, and that's a fact. He says he's having to invent words because there aren't any for the things he's doing. Cut Angle glanced sideways at his fellow mages. They nodded.
It will be an honor to admit him at the university, he said. Perhaps you would tell him so when he wakes up.
He felt a tugging at his robe and looked down. Excuse me, said Esk.
Hello, young lady, said Cut Angle in a sugar mouse voice. Have you come to see your brother enter the university?
He's not my brother, said Esk. There were times when the world had seemed to be full of brothers, but this wasn't one of them.
Are you important?
Are you important? She said. Cut Angle looked at his colleagues and beamed. There were fashions in wizardry, just like anything else. Sometimes wizards were thin and gaunt and talked to animals. The animals didn't listen, but it's the thought that counts. While at other times they tended toward the dark and saturnine, with little black pointed beards. Currently, Aldermanic was in. Cut Angle swelled with modesty.
Quite important, he said. One does one's best in the service of one's fellow man. Yes, quite important, I would say.
I want to be a wizard, said Esk. I think that will be a stopping point for now. We are reaching the hour. Not really a chapter break, but I feel like that works for right now. Yes. I gotta get up and stretch a bit. We will get back to Esk at Unseen University in the next chapter. Well, episode, or whatever you want to call these. Alright? Have a time, everybody. Have a time.